Of the Boston Regional Metropolitan Planning Organization Administration and Finance Committee to order. I'm going to read the guidelines. All participants will join with the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your last name, first name, and affiliation. Probably do the first name first. Participants can mute and unmute themselves. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this by clicking on either the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. I will then call upon participants. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Jonathan Church via the chat box, jchurch, C-H-U-R-C-H, @ctps.org, or 857-702-3709. I'm now going to read the accessibility statement. This meeting is being recorded. The meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodation in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Jonathan Church and via the chat box, via email at jchurch@ctps.org, or by calling 857-702-3709. Thank you. My name is Brian Kane. I am the Executive Director of the MBTA Advisory Board. We'll leave MBTA jokes aside today. And I will now call the roll of members. Leonard Diggins.
Here.
Thank you, Len. Derek.
Here.
Eric Barassa.
Good morning, Eric Barassa. I'm here.
Morning, Eric. And I don't see Dennis, but if he joins, he will be here. So we have a number of CTPS staff members here as well. Welcome. Thank you for being here. We're not going to do introductions because there's a lot of you and we have a lot to get through today. And let's talk about public comments, which is next. If any members of the public would like to make a comment, you could use the raise hand function and we would like to hear from you. Or you can submit written comments to staff, which will provide a copy to all of the members by emailing Jonathan Church at jchurch@ctps.org. Excuse me. I don't see anybody raising their hand, or I don't actually think there are any attendees who aren't participating. Okay, so we'll move on to the minutes of the June 9th, 2022 meeting. Is there a motion and a second to approve the meeting summary?
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting summary.
Thank you, Eric. Is there a second? Len or Derek, will you second this?
I'll second it. Thank you, Len.
Thank you, Len. Okay, we'll call the roll. Eric?
Yes.
Len?
Yes.
Derek?
Yes.
And I am a yes. That is everybody. Jonathan, let me just ask you real quick. Am I getting everybody who's on the committee?
Yes, you are.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. All right, so the meeting summary rather is approved, and we will now move on to agenda item 4, which is a review of the operations plan, write-up, and MPO elections process. Eric, I'd like to invite you to lead the discussion on the MPO elections process for the new MPO operations plan, and we'll have kind of a free-flowing discussion, but why don't you kick us off, please?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed this a lot. I forget if it was the last meeting or the meeting before, but we did put together the procedures, both the 2022 procedures, as well as sort of the overview that will go into the operations plan that was posted along with the agenda today. Just as folks might remember, for the sub-regional seats that that will be elected by just the municipalities from the subregions. The biggest change is that municipalities only need to seek 3 nominations instead of 5. And again, when we conduct, thank you for putting that up. And then when we conduct the actual election process, it will only be the municipalities from the subregion that vote. So we have started to communicate this to folks, and in fact, later today, assuming there's no additional discussion or issues today, I'm gonna send this out in mass to the subregions, and hopefully we start getting rolling with interest from municipalities running. So those are the that's the really in a nutshell, and this document is just kind of codifying the details of what we discussed the other week. So I'm happy to take any questions, but this largely reflects the conversation we had the last time we met. Len, Derek. Yeah, Len.
So this is a minor point, and I don't remember us discussing it, and it certainly isn't a deal breaker by any stretch. It's regarding the lack of need for all the select board to chime in on the nomination of a candidate. Is there rationale for that, just to expedite the process?
Yeah, what we've heard over the years was that we do this in August, and sometimes select board, and it's due like at the beginning of October, and sometimes select boards don't meet in August, and then they not meet until like the end of September or something like that. And so the idea there was that the chair of the select board, I think, are you the chair in Arlington, Len?
Yeah.
There's a certain there's a certain sort of authority that the chair is kind of given, and I know chairs like to get consensus from their fellow select board members, but that was the thinking, was just that from a timing standpoint, we thought the chair could nominate on their own. Usually what happens is our experience is that it's usually the staff or the town manager, and this is in towns, that are sort of interested in this, and then they go to their chairs and say, would you be, we'd like to do this, or are you okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, and I totally get that. And it's funny because whether I'm chair or not, the shorter the agenda, the better, but sometimes I kind of feel that even if this were on like the consent agenda, it gets the MPO into the eyes of people, and so they become aware of it, and maybe some of them have questions, but your rationale for doing it the way you're doing it certainly makes sense. I just happened to really pay attention to that line this time, so thanks.
It doesn't preclude it from happening, and in fact, there are some towns that and select boards that seek to do this.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah, I think my only question was, so there is a separate form, right? Like an online survey form, basically, that folks use to submit nominations and vote.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, there's guidance that's kind of separate from this document that explains
exactly
how all of that works. Okay.
So I think you reviewed that. There's a separate
Right.
guidance that is more detailed. That will be that will be sort of tweaked each year, with that has the dates, et cetera. This is for the operations plan, and then we're doing an online nomination form, which is 100 times easier than what we used to do. Was require people to get a paper form that they had to go out and get signatures. This it will be a lot easier, and I think this will facilitate more people interested in running, et cetera. Tegan.
Great.
Just to follow up on that comment, Derek, for everyone here, this is our beginning to, as Eric said, this is the write-up. This document is the start of the write-up for the operations plan itself. So if in looking at this gives you any ideas or feedback on how it's being written up for the operations plan, this is the kind of structure we'll continue to repeat as we add in additional sections. So just to very much clarify that this is the start of that document, separate from the other form that you're talking about. So we welcome any feedback on this as the format for the operations plan.
Great. So if there aren't any other questions, I think we're all set, and this can be, our first thing that we sort of, formally incorporate into the operations plan. Yeah, thanks all. Appreciate your input on this. This is great. Brian, back to you. Did we lose Brian?
I don't know.
We did.
I think we may have.
Awesome. Yeah.
I don't see him.
I don't see him in the list, and
So speaking of operations plan, I don't think we have a procedural way when there's a chair of a committee that drops off to sort of determine how we then continue. So that's a nice segue, but a segue we probably shouldn't quite make unless we get Brian back on.
Well, I feel like just
oh,
given,
somebody's trying to come in via their iPhone, so I'm thinking
Probably-
it's
it's probably-
probably Brian.
He's probably gonna have some lame excuse like his dog ate his wireless cable.
The wireless cable.
is he not coming in?
It looked like his audio was connecting. Now it looks like it could be connected, but it's muted.
Good morning, everyone. This is Dennis.
Oh,
Oh,
Oh, hi, Dennis.
Hi, Dennis.
all right. I'm going to text Brian.
we're happy to have you, but you're not who we're expecting.
Oh,
We lost our chair, so.
sorry, I can't help with that.
I think maybe if we can't get Brian back, I think we should probably go on to number 5. And I don't know if staff were leading that discussion or if there was an overview of some of the topics. Tegan's 1 minute, she says. Okay, you texted Brian.
Yeah, I was just texting him, and I can, if we pull up the spreadsheet, I can start just running through what's in the worksheet and sort of our approach to this, and I can
Okay, that'd be
start
great.
with that and see if he responds and is able to rejoin. So actually, Logan, if we could bring up the worksheet for on the screen. Let's see if Logan's able to do that. Yeah. So just to sort of cover at the high level here, the tactic we're sort of using here to try to give you something to work with for these discussions is to share. At this point, we're trying out sharing a Google Doc. So you have, sorry, Brian says that the Comcast just completely cut out in his town. So he's trying to reconnect. Let me just let him know. I'll give an overview. Okay. So the purpose of this is to really show that this is not a submittal or a formal document of any kind. It's meant to be a tool for the discussion. So we're trying to caveat it appropriately, especially given that, this is a public meeting. And so if anybody has any commentary or critique on the way that we're doing this, please, feel free to share that. But we worked with their comments from last time and with Brian to identify what we think would be one of the most, timely or useful next topics. And so what we honed in on was the officers of the board, because typically after an election, then the officers of the board, which right now is really only the vice chair, would then be elected on an annual basis according to the MOU. There's other aspects of the roles of the officers that were listed in that memorandum that kind of highlighted the areas of the operations plan that we wanted to explore. So the way this worksheet is set up is that first we looked at the memo and pulled out the sections that we identified in the memo that relate to this topic to say that these are the items that we propose that we talk about in this meeting and start to write out in the operations plan. So in our case here, it's the bullet point around the officers of the MPO board, the election terms, authority, and responsibility for information sharing. This can also extend more into just the board member roles in general. But in particular, we thought we would start with the topic around how representatives are assigned and sort of like what the process is. So after the elections happen, and we know it's, you know, the chief elected official, if I have the right terminology, I'm sorry if I don't. And then how does that sort of assignment of a representative on the board work? Right now, it's a pretty, I think, simple process where typically a letter is submitted. And then there's some sub bullets under this area that may not be something that we get into initially with this topic. So we've kind of put those in italics there, and I won't list them because they're in the memo, but I think we'll probably get into those sub bullets later. And then if you can scroll down a little bit. And then I think that there's some directly relevant items around the board meetings related to the roles of the officers, or we think. And that's around how the officers are sort of responsible for engaging in agenda setting and facilitating the board meetings and sort of processes around how that facilitation then works when the chair or the representative of the chair isn't present. Again, there are some other sub bullets, but those might be there for a future conversation. So that was the universe of things we thought we would talk about and that Brian was prepared to sort of talk through and have an open conversation about today. I do want to emphasize that those points come from the memo, which is a proposal for structure and content of the operations plan, and you can add and delete topics, you know, of course, as the committee see fit to do, but this gives you a structure. So then we tried to give you some supporting information as a reference to sort of start with. So if you scroll down into the MOU section, so we pulled out the lines from the MOU just for your reference that talk about officers of the board and the activities that they do. So you know what is clearly written in the MOU, and so what might be sort of fixed in that context. And so there's discussion around that. It's that there are 22 members, right? That there's 2 ex officio non-voting, that the chair is the secretary, that the vice chair be a municipal representative or one of the regional agency representatives, that the vice chair shall be elected to a year term, that the secretary or the chair sets, or the designee sets the agenda with the advice and input of the vice chair, calls meetings, presides at meetings, and disseminates information. And the vice chair presides in the absence of the chair. Now, there's a lot of nuances within that, right? But that's the framework that's set out in the MOU. Then what we did for this topic, because this kind of the governance structure was a big topic that we heard a lot about from the feds in the last certification review, we quoted some of the text out of the certification review because we are doing this in response to a recommendation from the feds from that review. And so we thought it useful to give you kind of the brief reference, but really the section of the certification and review that was most relevant to this topic area. Hopefully you had a chance to read through those, but I just in the interest of giving a summary, I won't dive into those details right now, but I think in discussion you can. And if you can scroll down further past this section, Logan, thank you. So then the question topics for discussion section was the framework that in working with Brian in kind of setting up this document for this meeting, we as staff and Brian started to put together the kinds of questions that you could discuss as a committee to start to kind of dig into this topic and to start to give us more detail about what you would like to see in the operations plan. So one of the questions is, you know, again, there's a baseline description of what the roles and responsibilities of the chair are, calls meetings, presides, and disseminates timely information. But what further elaboration do you feel is needed to clarify what that means? What does it mean to preside? You know, are there any other kind of aspects of that that you want to clarify? What's the notification process, if any, that should be provided to the board if there is going to be a change in who is chairing the board? Right now, there isn't a notification process, and maybe that's fine. But this was a question that, you know, Brian thought was worth discussing. How in the agenda setting process, it's stated very simply, right? It's set by the chair with input from the vice chair, but there's no kind of like process outlined beyond that. So, you know, the way we do it right now might be the way you want to continue to do it, and we can talk about what that process is, or you may want to clarify some adjustment to it. And then I think things like disseminating timely information is incredibly vague. And I you know, I'm not sure what that was intended to reference. And I'm not sure if there's any clarification that you all want to discuss about what is actually useful or helpful in terms of timely information. Then there's really no determined sort of process and timing around electing the vice chair. We've had, I think, a very happy situation where I think the board's very much been in support of the vice chair being reelected each year, which has been, Eric, we're also representing MAPC as a regional agency. And there's just a question as to whether we want to formalize that process, because I'm not sure that we've reliably engaged every single year in a predictable and repeatable process to sort of make that nomination and confirm that nomination. Oh, Brian's back. I can finish running through the questions, Brian, if you want to. I just noticed you were back. You've probably been back for a while. Then there's a question around, are there other responsibilities of the vice chair other than around the agenda setting that the board wants to establish? And then what happens at a board meeting if neither the chair or the representative or the vice chair and the representative can preside? And then maybe some further clarification around what it means to be a designee or an alternate. And what's the process to identify those roles? And so is there a process that should happen when the secretary changes? Is there a process for identifying what is really expected in terms of the designee from an agency like the MBTA advisory board? So I think Brian was willing to call his own situation out, but there's not really there's not clarity there that it would be the executive director of the advisory board, right? It's just that there's a representative from the advisory board. The MBTA advisory board, excuse me, I should be clear on that. There's another question around, should there be any additional officers? I think once upon a time, there was a reference to like an executive secretary. Does the board feel like you want any additional officers assigned? And then, Brian, maybe you can talk about this more, but there's also a question around whether there's an interest or a need around an annual meeting. And then because of the agenda setting process question, one thing we also added to this worksheet is we laid out for you in a bullet point what our process is currently as staff working with the chair and the vice chair to do the agenda setting process if you wish to discuss it. So with that, Brian, I'm sorry, I'm not sure when you were able to get back in, but I just provided an overview of the content in here. And as you saw, just laid out the questions, and I'm happy to turn it back over to you to facilitate a conversation.
Thanks, Tegan. This is every person who works from home's nightmare. So the internet here is a little unstable, so I'm going to leave the camera off for a little while I talk. And I'm sorry I missed about 20 minutes. No, maybe not 20 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. So my apologies, but thank you for stepping up. And Eric, I'm sure you did great on the elections discussion, so thank you for that. So as Tegan said, was we were going through this, the concept here is to sort of think of the MOU as the scaffolding upon which this is all built. But you can't just have scaffolding. You need to put stuff around it to build the building. So I wanted to just sort of talk through with the committee. I think we know how it kind of works now, but the operations plan is really meant to codify, and we can certainly just codify what we currently do and what our current operations are, and that would be probably sufficient. But as I think about the MPO and I think about the MOU, certain things come to mind as you think a little deeper about it. So the chair of the Boston Regional MPO is the Secretary of Transportation. That is very clear. It's not David. It's not Steve. It's Jamie Tesler. And I think we forget that oftentimes. And I know at the beginning of every meeting, whoever's presiding says they're representing the secretary. So one of the questions that I have, and this is something that I wrestle with my own organization, is how do we know that somebody represents somebody else? And Len, I'll put you on the spot here a little bit. In your non-day job, you are an elected official from Arlington.
Yeah.
And the process that we go through with Arlington is that, every year I try to get whoever the chief elected official, which this case happens to be Len, to tell me in writing who the designee is, who your designee is. And luckily, we're lucky to have the poet laureate of transportation representing Arlington. But as we think about this, what I'm trying to get at is I would like the Secretary of Transportation every so often to A, show up, say hello, preside at a meeting, call it to order, whatever, and B, officially designate a person or set of persons as their designee to the Boston Regional MPO. Now, we all know it's David, and we all like David, and we all trust David, and David's been doing it forever. There's no question that it's David. But someday David will not be working for MassDOT. And what happens then? So the reason we want to put this into sort of a codification is because we don't know what's coming next. So I guess what I would like to discuss with you, Len, and Eric and Derek is how do we feel about that statement that the secretary should A, be invited to come or expected to come at least once a year, B, whenever there's a new secretary, they need to inform the Boston Region MPO via either CTPS or whomever, who their designee is or designees are. And then C, I want to talk about what happens when those designees or designee can't make it, or, and I didn't plan this, had a situation like I just had where their internet kicks out. Then what happens? So Len, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and ask you to just respond to that.
Sure. I mean, well, for A, I mean, I wouldn't make the person come into a meeting, whether it's in person or virtual. I mean, it's just, you know, Brian, I mean, there just often just aren't enough hours of the day to get done what people are asking you to do, you know, and so I think it's sufficient for the secretary to make it known to us who the designee or designees are. I mean, on whatever basis we, you know, decide is best, you know, and then we should have this a backup, you know, and I think that will be fine. I mean, we can only prepare for so many contingencies, you know, and so, you know, you lost your internet. If it were in person, you could have been in an accident, you know. I think in person might even be harder because it'd be harder to get someone there, you know, if something were to happen to you on the way. I mean, here, I mean, virtual, at least maybe you could have someone kind of on standby, you know, but I think it would be best for the board to know who is going to fill in on any given meeting if the chair can't be there. I mean, right now it's the vice chair. If both the chair and the vice chair can't be there, then we come up with a third person. But I think that's as far as we go, because if something wipes out all three, well, I mean, it's probably a very unusual situation, you know, and so you can go a fourth one, but I wouldn't go any further than four. And I don't know if you really asked this question, but in the case of Arlington and our designee, and the reason I'm able to continue being on the board representing the advisory council, who representing the advisory council on, and I'm there by virtue of being on the right oversight committee, is that when the select board or the chair turns it over to the designee doesn't report back to the select board at all. We are essentially that person is now in the realm of the town manager, and is really acting independently. So I was thinking, is the word really represent me, or is it that it speaks instead of? I'll go with represent because that's what we use. But I just want to make it really clear though that person isn't coming back to me saying, is this okay? And I guess the reason I add that is that I kind of get the feeling that's what's going on with the designee for Secretary of Transportation. But we can ask David, if he goes back to the secretary and gets, feedback on what he's doing in the MPO meetings.
So more like a plenipotentiary. which is someone who's deputized to act for an entity. So ambassadors are plenipotentiaries of the United States, for instance. They can make decisions for. Thanks, Len. That was good. And I just like to use the word plenipotentiary whenever I can. So
Because like you're not the poet.
I'm not the poet laureate. No, I'm not. So Erica, you've been here a very long time. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
I mean, with respect to sort of the chair, and maybe having some consistency with how we do it with the other, members, I could see a process if we want to kind of more formalize this in the operations plan where the secretary, and we'd have to decide, what this is. Is it every year or is it every couple of years, submits a letter to the MPO, designating their designee and their alternate. It probably would be a good idea for, like MAPC and the Mbta advisory board, and I would assume, that the executive director is the, is the member, and then they select, their designee, which could be themselves, and then an alternate. And I think with respect to sort of presiding at the meetings, I mean, I feel like, we've been doing this for a long time now, and, if it's not David, it's Steve. And then if neither of them can make it, I've chaired, rarely, but I've stepped up, and I feel like, we've never had an instance where like one of us wasn't available. And I think, and we should formalize the vice chair election too. And if for some reason somebody else wanted to step up and somebody else was the vice chair, I would think also the same thing would happen, that if it wasn't David or Steve, then kind of that third person could step up and facilitate the meeting. But I do think formalizing this makes some sense. I think we have to figure out what that, is it every year or is it every couple of years? And then with respect to the secretary, coming, I guess I feel like that's really, to me, that's like if, I'm under the assumption that David, that the executive director of the Office of Transportation Planning is in close coordination and contact with the secretary on the matters that are happening at the MPO. And so, to me, that's really a decision of MassDOT and secretary. Like, I think just doing something where we say, oh, we want the secretary to be there every couple months, and it's just kind of a pro forma thing. I don't know if that really makes sense. I really look to MassDOT to decide what makes sense for them in terms of who's chairing the meeting and if they need to bring the secretary. Now, I think in the past, the MPO had asked, when there were some big issues going on, if the secretary could come. I think we had Janelle Lisi come once. We had Secretary Pollock come. So nothing precludes, I think, the MPO from asking, for something like that. I think we haven't done it with the virtual format. But those are my thoughts on some of these issues.
So this is Dennis. I do have a couple of thoughts regarding, especially around the agency. Each of the municipalities, I think, have a 3-year term. And each one of the beginning of the 3-year, I think there's a letter that's sent, right? Once you get reelected, does it initiate a new letter from the chief executive officer to provide the designee? Or does it just continue without after the election?
Does anyone know? It's a good question.
The letter would be coming from the actual MPO member who was elected, and then they would sign the letter that we send them for designating the. So what we can do is send a template to them to fill out, and then we would then keep that letter on record for the remainder of their term. And then if they were reelected again, they would be, that a new letter would be sent in place to update.
So it initiates a new letter to support who the person is going to be, who will be representing that community, right?
Correct.
Okay. So we, using that as a template, and that's the majority of the members, right?
Yes.
Do we want to use a similar process for the agencies where they have a term, whatever that may be, and then once that term expires, a new letter is initiated, and or if the representative changes hand, for example, if in the interim, a 3-year, we go to a 3-year term, if the Secretary of Transportation changes, then that should probably initiate a new letter. Or do we just want to do when it changes, when the person or group that designates the person changes, then initiates a new letter?
So I guess I would say, Dennis, great questions. I think the Secretary of Transportation should designate who their designee and alternates are in writing.
Yep.
At least whenever there's a new Secretary of Transportation, whenever they're sworn into the cabinet, for instance.
I agree with that. Yep.
I think we need to make it clear that the designee and alternate serves at the pleasure of the Secretary.
Yep.
So that if for some reason they retire, they can no longer, well, I guess they could, but anyway. And then I guess, to your point, yes, there should be on file somewhere at CTPS, a series of written documents, and emails are sufficient where I work, that says, Dennis represents Framingham, signed by the mayor.
Right, exactly. Yep. Okay. The other comment I have is regarding the chair and presiding over the meeting. I always find it a little odd that when David's not there, someone else from MassDOT presides and not the vice chair. I've never been to a group where the organization owns the seat. It's really the person. And so when David's not there, I always felt that Eric should run the meeting, not somebody who else in MassDOT. He has the role of the vice chair. I don't know if that's the language in the MOU or how it's written, but I think Eric, or the vice chair should preside when the chair is not there and not somebody else within their organization. I was just like I said, I always found that to be somewhat odd.
It is odd. It's very
yeah,
odd.
yeah. And I know the feds talked about having the MassDOT always be the chair, right? I'm not sure we want to go down that. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other, but I think we should have some discussion about that, because that was, if I'm correct, the feds commented that that's an unusual situation, right?
It's very unusual.
Right.
In nationally, not in Massachusetts, but nationally.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Cassandra.
Yeah, so
So
those are my general comments, I think.
Derek, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was gonna actually say something that seems to be relevant to this as well, but as far as the kind of process flow of sharing and designees goes, I think the reason that it sometimes gets passed from David to Steve and then to Eric, and then I actually ended up chairing as well. So I, at one point for a very short time, so I think there does need to be something in writing that sort of specifies what this process is. But I was going to say, I think part of the rationale for that is the day-to-day business of the MPO, and how much coordination there is between CTPS and staff and MassDOT planning, I can see the logic in having that flow from Steve or David to Steve, and then having the liaison to the Boston MPO within OTP involved as well somehow in this process, just because of how familiar we are with the day-to-day activities of the MPO and a lot of the items that end up on the agenda that we have to talk through and discuss. I think we're best positioned to facilitate that discussion just because of how familiar we are with process and tip amendments and the 3C transportation planning process. And of course, Eric, because of how closely we coordinate as well, I mean, you're obviously an expert on that too. But that's you in particular. So I could see a scenario where, a future vice chair might not be as well versed in that. So I just wanted to make that comment that I think, I could see that logic of having it be, Mass.OTP, not just obviously at OTP and have that bias, but also because I think it's logical that, we're very familiar with the process and we can, I think, sometimes be best suited to facilitate those discussions. But just wanted to articulate that.
Thank you. I mean, I guess that's
yeah.
predicated on assuming there should continue to be a close relationship between those two entities, which is not necessarily in the MOU. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be there, but I guess it's one of those questions of just because it's the way we do it now, is it the way we should be doing it? And I guess that's a question that we need to wrestle with at some point. But let me hear from Eric. I think I have you next on the list.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, again, I think having a designee and an alternate, and if the designee can't be there to chair, then the alternate can chair. And then if neither of them can be there, then it flows to the vice chair. And if the vice chair can't be there, then the vice chair's alternate. I think that could be a nice process for ensuring, sort of consistency in the process. If we want to, codify this. And then I think to Dennis's question, which I also, is that every year? Is it every 2 years? Is it every 3 years? I guess for the vice chair, it'd be every year because the vice chair election is every year. So, they're just, if it's going to be a formal process, there just needs to be kind of some dates on when this stuff needs to happen, because otherwise people will forget. And, it'll be like 5 years later. Oh yeah, there's some letter somewhere. Oh, all those people are gone.
Yeah, the way that we try to get around that, and I think you do this too, Eric, at MAPC, is you have one sort of big annual meeting or something where the elections all take place and
yeah, exactly.
It's on the calendar and everyone kind of knows it's coming. And then, so I think we should think about that for the MPO, having election day or whatever we want to call it. And maybe that would be a day the secretary could be invited to preside briefly. Just throwing it out there. It would be nice if we saw them every so often. Eric, you all set on this topic?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and my last just input would be, it could be that you in the operations plan, we say at the first meeting pick a month, first meeting in January or something like that, if you wanted to coincide it with, sort of gubernatorial cycles too. The secretary will preside and, designees will be, identified or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I think it would be nice if the actual chair presided over the election of the vice chair. There's something symbolic I like about that. But yes, thank you, Eric. That's brilliant. Len, I see you next.
I'm just going to chime in and say that I understand how it does seem odd, to have the other designee or the backup means for the secretary take over a meeting when the primary designee isn't there. But I do think it makes sense, given that the chair seat, the chair belongs, or that chair seat is for the Secretary of Transportation. And I actually prefer it because it gives us, I think it gives MassDOT more incentive to be at the meetings, and especially if the primary designee can't be there. And so it gives us another voice at the table, and it's an important voice at the table. And I think that voice is very important. And the reason that perhaps Massachusetts is different than other states is because Massachusetts puts up the 20% match. And so my question though is, are we the only state that does that?
Does anyone know? Cassandra, do you know? Tegan, do you know? See, you raised your hand.
I can try. Okay, Cassie, do you actually have the more exact answer? Because I have a sense, but I'm not sure if it's totally correct.
Yeah, go for it, Tegan, and I can add on to it because
So
I'm
my-
not as sure.
Okay, my understanding to date is I haven't identified another MPO in the country, and talking through AMPO and other board and and other MPOs across the country where the state permanently chairs the MPOs. I think Massachusetts is the only one I've seen where that's the case. There are other states in which the DOTs provide all the match or part of the matching funds, but they do not share the boards. And in some cases, they might even be an ex officio member. So I don't think that chairing is necessarily tied to the state's participation, but the relationship is different, right? In every context, but we seem to be unique in our state.
Well, that's good information to have. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
I could also, if it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead,
weigh
Derek,
in on
please.
that question. Yeah, I think one of the unique factors about the process in Massachusetts has to do with what's called local public agency, and that even if MassDOT's not providing or is providing, or if other states, the state DOT provides the matches, it's possible that the DOT isn't quite as involved in project development as MassDOT is. I think that's something really unique about us here, is that there's a oversight agreement with Federal Highway that really doesn't allow a lot of federal dollars to flow without MassDOT Highway Division having a role in project development, just because of our guidelines surrounding project design and complete streets elements and all of those engineering directives that we have, and having some oversight over the design. So that's another kind of layer to all of this, is that in addition to the funding piece, there's an element of oversight over design as well. And given the business of the MPO having a lot to do with projects and tip funding and things like that, it often comes up. So I think that's another factor in all of this.
Yeah, thanks. That was very helpful. So I appreciate it.
Cassandra, did I cut you off there? Did you want to come in as well?
No, I agree with all of that. And Tegan, that is my understanding as well, as Massachusetts is very unique, and I am not aware of another state that has MPOs that have the state as the chair. But also I am aware of other states that do provide that match. So just kind of echoing that. And Derek, yes, I know Massachusetts doesn't have an LPA program, so that's a good point as well.
Thank you very much. Jen Rowe from Boston. Hello.
Hi. Sorry for joining late. I thought Bill was gonna make it and thought I would check, and glad I did. I just wanted to weigh in. I guess I just wanted to second the thought of like further conversation around chairship. I guess from sort of a facilitation perspective, from trainings I've taken, like generally it's recommended that in facilitating a group that's doing dialogue and debate and negotiation, that the facilitator be maybe no more than like 20% invested in the outcome, because otherwise it can be hard to manage the relationship of both negotiating for a particular outcome and also facilitating like enough dialogue, debate, and negotiation. And I think particularly in the case where I think for our MPO, a lot of the municipal representatives certainly like are staffed by people who this isn't their full-time job, and they may not have time to like really get into the weeds. I think it might be helpful to have a chair that maybe is slightly, I appreciate like MassDOT's voice and expertise and that they're really in the weeds and know, and I think it's important that we have that at the meetings, but I think sometimes that can maybe make it harder for particular representatives to speak up and feel that they can ask questions and engage when they might not be coming from a position of as much kind of technical expertise. So just wanted to put that out there.
No, thank you. The proverbial elephant in the room question. Very, very good point. Thank you. We only have like 10 minutes left. So let me see if Eric, go ahead. I'm sorry. I
I
didn't
was
see
going to say, I would agree with that, Jen. I think that's 100% right. I think in these types of meetings, it's better if the facilitator is kind of a more neutral facilitator, but I've wrestled with that issue myself, and I just don't know like how to do that. And I think, I think it kind of is what it is, but I agree. I think that's a really good point. I just wanted to say that.
Absolutely.
There was something else in this list I was going to comment on.
Well, we haven't even discussed agenda setting, which is.
Oh, the timely information piece. We probably can't get to this today, but I do feel like at some point in this conversation, I don't know if this is the right area for it, but I do think we need to say something in the MOU about bringing information to the MPO members. And this goes back to the spring where when we were doing the tip development, there were like new projects that were introduced sort of like the morning of, decision-making time. And I heard from many members who were like so confused about that. And so I think somewhere in here, whether it's in this section or somewhere else in the operations plan, we need to have clarity on like this sort of what is timely information and when can you kind of not expect people, to vote on things. How much information ahead of time do we need to give people? So I just wanted to flag that. We probably don't have time to go deep into that today.
Very, very important point, Eric. Yes, we definitely need to put some time aside for that. Can I actually put you on the spot since I have you here, Eric, about agenda setting, just so we can try to get a little bit discussed on that? How do you've done this for a long time. I mean, how do you think it works now? And
I think the agenda setting process is pretty good. I mean, the staff essentially, propose the agenda and then, Massot, Derek and Steve and David review it and I review it and we discuss it. And then there's sometimes in that meeting, I'll raise something, that I think should be on the agenda. Derek might raise, it's sort of an opportunity to raise issues and we kind of discuss it, but it does start with the staff. And I think that process is a good one. And we do that essentially 2 Mondays before the meeting so that whatever is decided can be posted, a week ahead of time. That's what we're shooting for.
This is Dennis again. Sorry. One of the things that I find a little lacking is a process by which members can request an agenda item. There's really not a formal way of doing that other than ask Dave to put it on and he can, do it or not do it. But I think there should be something written how a member can propose a agenda item that either gets voted on or gets discussed at a meeting of some nature. I guess we could probably do it if we wanted to at a meeting, but I think we should. It's very seldom done, so I would like to see something in writing about how that may occur.
Yeah, I completely agree, Dennis. And just to follow up on that, we've had 2 sort of resolutions recently, and I'd love to figure out how that plays into this, because there's got to be a better way to discuss the things we want to discuss than tacking on resolutions to votes at the end of things. So I completely.
Maybe we could be clear that the member items part of the agenda, which is every agenda, is an opportunity for members to raise issues that they would like for consideration on the agenda for another meeting. We could be just clear in the operations plan that is like the intent of members items is not only to announce things, but also that's an opportunity for members to potentially request discussion of things in the future.
Yeah, I think that's right, Eric, and I think that is an opportunity. But I've known in the past that people have raised that issue, and then but it never gets on the agenda. I mean, or it takes months to be on the agenda. If there's something that some folks don't want to discuss. I think there's got to be at least somewhere written where a motion of some nature can be taken so that the members can, either support something written where, a member can request and make a motion to do that.
Len, I see your hand up.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That's an interesting thought, Dennis. And I find myself wanting to call you Mr. Something, going into formal mode when I think about agendas, because normally with a board, requests are honored as a courtesy. Board members can make a request, and it's honored as a courtesy to the board members. But we're a large board, so that to a certain extent becomes it would be hard to make it work if everyone engaged in the process that way, and so I think to a certain point we're in a situation where it's going to be at the discretion of the committee, or the folks that make the agenda. But it's a good point you raised. And I'm thinking there's a formal process to submit it, but there would have to be like a formal process to accept it or get even it on the agenda for a vote by the members. And so maybe another way around it is just to get enough members to request it, and that way it becomes apparent that it is a concern of the members of the board. But good point, Dennis. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So just time check here, folks. We got 3 minutes left. So let me see if I can propose sort of a path forward here. So why don't we let sort of staff take this, write up a draft of the things that have been discussed in a working document, and then we'll leave the remaining questions to be responded to. Folks can also send written comments on things into staff if you like, and you can, for open meeting law reasons, we can't copy each other, but we can discuss those at a later date.
Can you send this document out? I don't think it was posted, right?
Logan actually sent it. It was embedded in one of his recent mails. I missed it too. Logan, his job. I just missed it. For some reason I thought it was going to be on the website because it's where I usually go and get my materials, but it's a shared document. So
yeah, it's a Google Doc. So I guess the idea is that we could provide written comments on it.
I'll read those mails more closely. Thank you.
In public, right? Because we have OML issues, not issues, but we want to make sure we're above the fray. So, okay, I think we've actually covered a lot here in a very short period of time, and I do apologize for being disconnected for a while. But let's call this one. Let staff do their thing, and we'll reconvene. When are we going to reconvene, Tegan, Jonathan? Anyone know?
I think I sent Jonathan to go set up the next meeting. Annette, can you remind me when we said the next available date would be? We're just juggling other committees. Is it the 18th? All right, we may have to get back.
Anyway,
to
yeah, okay.
Jonathan, just because Jonathan had to jump over to the MPO meeting.
We have a meeting on the 18th, so we'll keep that penciled in our calendars. Okay. Otherwise, we'll skip member items. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn.
Without objection, we are adjourned. See you all in a minute.
I'm going to be late to the MPO meeting, but I'm coming. Guys, switch rooms. Bye.